Fantastic. So thanks for joining us today, Graham.
Yes, welcome. I'm delighted to be here. I've got my coffee and I'm in your hands.
Well fueled up. Glad to hear it. Fantastic. Well, before we get cracking, then, do you want to just give everyone just a little bit of background on yourself and maybe your kind of experience and how you came to be heading up the Forge Holiday Group?
Sure, yeah. I think I've had three proper jobs in my career. My first one at a very young, early age, I became the director of TUI, so running the tourism businesses all over Europe. Now, you got to remember, this is back in the time when the internet didn't really exist. So I was like a young whippersnapper, plucked, and I sat on the board. And I was in my late 20s, surrounded by people in their late 50s, which seemed very old at the time. It doesn't seem old now. um, Sort of a teaching them about the internet. And we did that for 7 years and we grew it to probably one of the most successful travel e-commerce platforms globally. It was about 3 billion sort of a turnover in that period from almost zero. So super fun, super interesting. And I ran all the businesses in Europe digitally. I then left there and there was a business in North Wales called Money Supermarket that was starting up and was just about to IPO or just right in the midst of IPOing, set up by a very entrepreneurial founder called Simon Nixon. And they decided that they wanted to hire myself to come and run the travel business. And I went in, I ran the travel business. And I think within 6 months, realized all the money was really in financial services. So I pivoted my role into financial services and I ran the financial services business as the MD and the travel business. Again, 7 years and highs and lows, credit crunch, market cap 2 billion, market cap 400 million, the whole variety of shenanigans in between. And really my role was to help transition it from a very entrepreneurial business, which was great, but into a more professionally run PLC, but still try to retain some of the entrepreneurial sort of a feel. And then weirdly retired in my early 40s. I don't know why. Spent about a year getting to know my wife again and my children. And then my wife said, I've had enough of you. Can you go and find a proper job? I did the whole non executive thing, did all that sort of a stuff, and really struggled because I kept going in as a non exec, pretending to be an exec. That was tough. And then I found Sykes, this business I'm in today, a very small business, private equity owned at the time, about 5 million sort of EBITDA, but had the potential to grow significantly. And I guess since then, we've scaled it to be the market leader in the UK, done 24 M&As, integrated it, gone from 180 people to 2,000 at our peak. We're back down to about 1,700 now. Took the turnover to 600 million transaction value, 35% EBITDA margin, bought businesses internationally, made lots of acquisitions. And here I am today, basically.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure there's lots of questions which will come out of that, and we're going to have a little Q&A at the end, if that's all right. So if anyone's got some thoughts, I'm sure there's plenty from there, but please write them down. Now, you're a bit of a data geek, a bit like me, I believe, kindred spirits. So I really wanted to start with the whole COVID thing, right? Because it feels like post-COVID, we've been on a bit of a roller coaster. And in your position, it's relatively unique because you've had so much access to data and really understand what's been going on with the market. How have you seen that roller coaster then, really, since 2020, kind of going through the staycation boom and then the way things have kind of panned out since then?
Well, I mean, a couple of questions there. I mean, I think if I take the data one first, I I was fortunate in Money Supermarket that we learned the power of data very early on in the business, and we thought about data as a superpower. And we had, I think at the time, at peak, about 150 people in our data team. And we created data products. We sold data products to the industry. We fed it into actuarial teams so they could build models. We had access to a huge amount of data. And it became one of our key pillars in terms of growing the business. So I always believed in the idea of data, insight, and then action, how you think about it in those three sort of sequences. So when
Mm.
I joined this business, it became just like, what's our data? Where do we get our data? How do we build a data platform? How do we think of data as a superpower? How do we create an architecture? How do we hire data scientists? How do we hire data engineers? All of that stuff. And then we use data to create a competitive advantage. So I love data and I've seen the power of data in terms of how it can help you shape, build product, and create a competitive advantage. COVID obviously was a nightmare. We went from probably a business that was doing incredibly well to a business that suddenly was going to run out of money in 3 months. We had 150 million of deposits we'd taken in on holidays that would paid out to the owners because we're an agent. We didn't have the money, but everybody wanted the money back. And who did they come? Who did they talk to get the money back? Us. So, we were really in a really difficult sort of a period. So, I had 10,000 people calling us a day asking for the money back. And then the government lifted the ban and everybody could go on holiday, but they could only really wanted to go in the UK. So I had another problem, which is like everybody wanted the money back and everybody wanted a holiday. So it was like, famine to feast, and it was like chaos.
Mm,
But it taught me a couple of things. One, it taught me obviously the resilience of the team. It taught me the power of being able to just really get shit done quite quickly. Excuse my language. When you're in crisis mode, that was quite important. And we had
mm,
these many Cobra meetings we used to have at 8 o'clock every morning, and it was like, what are we going to do today? And it was amazing just to see when you didn't have the bureaucracy and the scale and some of the people getting in the way, just how much stuff you could get through. So we then ended up at the back end of COVID having the best year ever. I think at the time, reported profitability was 75 million EBITDA. So it was like, this is the future. Everybody's going to stay in the UK. No one's going to jump on planes anymore. Life is good. And then what happened is people decided, do you know what? I do want to jump on planes again. I do want to go overseas. I quite fancy going to the sunshine. And suddenly it got quite tough again. And we really had 2 years, I'd say, of like just not knowing what market we're in, what are the comparable data sets we should be using. Is this going to be the revenge travel year and everybody goes overseas, or are they going to come back to the UK? Normalization. So it's very difficult to plan, to forecast, to budget, and to build out all your models. At the same time, in my foolishness, I decided that we should keep scaling, and we made a number of big acquisitions. We've done a number of acquisitions, but I think the largest at the time was maybe 50 million plus in terms of acquisition. I decided that we should buy something that was 300 odd million, and then sort of integrate it because interest rates were very low. And of course, they're going to stay low. We could leverage our profitability, take on some more debt, scale the business, and sort of accelerate away. And the world changed, governments changed, the economy changed, consumer confidence changed. We had a business that was much more sort of a complicated, that was growing in much more scale, but actually become much more difficult to sort of manage. So it's been a real roller coaster. And I guess this year is probably the first normal year, if I can call it that. But we're in a year, obviously, where demand is back 7% roughly year on year. So what you're having to do is to sort of fight really hard to take market share. You're looking for efficiencies everywhere. The ultimate goal for a business like mine is to be able to grow my top line and to grow my bottom line and create that sort of a leverage on both ends. We're very good at the moment of creating efficiencies and growing the bottom line and growing profitability, because as you've scaled and you've got bigger and bigger, you've maybe not, you've done things that you wouldn't normally sort of be doing. You've taken on costs and you're inefficient. So that's been really good, but they're one-offs and you can't keep doing that. Now we're in a position where we're thinking, how do we get that top line growth back? How do we get, and it doesn't have to be huge, I'd be happy to grow at 6 to 10% a year, because our EBITDA margin is really good. And if I look at my EBITDA margin of 35% and my 10% revenue growth, I add them together, that's a powerful business. And when you're a big business, that's fine. So that's sort of the environment we're in at the moment, but that's where AI has come in and data has come in about me to really leveraging and trying to take advantage of, I guess, efficiencies and process and operation, but just find new ways of leaning into revenue growth opportunities as well as the continual operational improvements as well.
and there's a treasure trove of information in there. Thank you for sharing. I guess if I was going to pull on one thread from what you said, I'm very interested in how a business of your size views acquisitions, because you talked about previous acquisitions and maybe overstretching a little bit. What's the kind of strategic importance of those acquisitions to the business?
I think it's twofold. First of all, they either have to give you a strategic advantage in some way, shape, or form. So they have to align to your strategy. Or they just make good commercial sense because you can create value from them. So we had two approaches. In the early days, the approach was the supply, as in the property stock, is the fuel for our business. We're very good at generating demand through digital marketing and organic activity, all that stuff. We had tons of traffic, which was a nice thing. But we had a disconnect between some regions. We had tons of supply, demand, and we didn't. Sorry, tons of demand. We didn't have enough supply. So the acquisitions became like, who has a supply? How do we get it? So we
Mhm.
started knocking on people's doors and looking at acquisition. And all I was interested in was, if I buy a business, can I bring it into my portfolio? Can I create it as into a technology, leverage it, and synergize it to a lower multiple within 12 months, so it creates value in my sort of a P&L. And our rule of thumb was roughly, last time we sold the business, or we had a reinvestor, we sold the business at a multiple of 14 times our EBITDA. So I used that as a benchmark and said, I'm happy to pay anything for a business, 14 times the profitability, 16 times, 20 times, don't care. As long as I can synergize that within 12 months to less than 14, and ideally 10 or less, because if I sell the business again for the next investor, I'm working on the assumption I'll sell at a similar multiple, so I'm creating value and I'm arbitraging that. So that was the
Mhm.
playbook. And it was fine in the early days because like nobody else was really doing it, but then everybody started doing it and it created competitive tension and prices got a little bit silly in the marketplace and everybody's expectations. And then we got to the point where we just had bought everybody. It sounds ridiculous, but there was nobody left to buy. And the only things that were left were really quite big. And the problem we had on the big things is every time we looked at it, we didn't believe that, given the regulatory environment of the CMA, who very much until recently was anti-business, we didn't believe we could make any big acquisitions because we would come under antitrust. Because the rule of thumb with the CMA was pretty much, I'll sniff it if it looks like a bad deal, it looks like it's going to create consumer challenges, I'll say no. Now the regime has changed recently. In fact, the deal that happened yesterday with Vodafone that you may have picked up, I think it's a great example of being more pro-business. But Vodafone had to commit to investing 1 billion into the UK infrastructure, so maybe there'll be some more larger M&A opportunities that I can unpick from a strategic point of view. So I then pivoted ourselves into, well, if I can't buy any of the more traditional things, can I buy some other things that are important for our strategy that allow us to scale? And I then made 3 acquisitions, really. One was international. One was a caravan business because we didn't have caravans and people go on holiday in caravans, and could we replicate this in caravans? And then the other one was a business called Forest Holidays. And that one was where we actually were a manufacturer and we're building cabins in UK public forests. And we have a framework agreement with the government to build exclusively up and down the UK. Capital intensive, but building, running, and
Mm.
operate. And those are more strategic investments. If I'm thinking about like a Boston consulting sort of a matrix, what's my cash cow? What are my opportunities? What are my stars? What are the things I need to stop doing? I was placing all these different bets, trying to be able to think about the story, because the challenge I have in private equity is you're always trying to think about your story. You're always trying to think about your exit, which sounds weird, but you're always trying to think about like, what story am I telling to my next investor? That could be public, an IP. It could be another big private equity company. It could be a trade buyer, but I need a story, and it needs to be a growth story because I need a growth story so I can get value. So I'm always trying to think 3 years ahead, and the horizon I'm always looking at is, currently it's 2030. I'm about to do, after this, I'm about to talk to 1,800 people, and I'll be talking about 2030. Where are we? What's the plan? What's the purpose? Where are we on that mission? Because the role of me as the group CEO is to help steer that ship in that way and actually make sure that we're horizon scanning as often as I possibly can.
This must be an incredibly challenging time to be predicting 3 years ahead because, I mean, right now I struggle to predict 3 months ahead with, all the changes which we're seeing rapidly. So, how do you approach that challenge and where do you see things being in 3 years' time? If I can ask the magic question.
Yeah, I mean, it's look, you have to just have some hypothesis, and you have to really think about like, what's the key investment? If I'm writing the investment thesis now, what am I writing? What story do I want to tell? And we do a lot of sort of, pre-mortem exercises. We sort of go to the future and work our way back and say, what does that look like? And there's some things that are always going to be true. Certain things like businesses that have good either top line growth or profitability growth are valuable. And you know, really good businesses, when they get to scale, are able to do both. So you sort of say, well, what does it need to look like? And we, you know, again, this sounds like awful, but we actually pick a profitability number, and then we pick a multiple to work our way back. So I'll make up some numbers roughly. We need 100 million EBITDA, a 14 times multiple of that EBITDA, and to create like an enterprise value, you know, 1.5 billion plus. We need to be growing our top line at this number. So we're showing growth because that's valuable. We need to have a constant EBITDA margin. So we go through all that sort of stuff. And then we work out like, well, how do we do that? Well, what we probably need is, you know, supply. We need brilliant people. We need to have exceptional service. And more recently, and again, this is just a CEO, uh, you know, a CEO sort of a push at the moment. You know, I talk about AI as like an enabler in our strategic vision. You'll probably see on behind me, there's a little castle. The reason there's a castle behind me, because I talk to the organization a lot about the idea of building a moat. And so what I'm trying to do is to say, like, you know, how big is our moat? How deep is our moat around our business? And you know, it's unlikely that we're going to be exceptional at one thing. Ideally, what you want to be is pretty good at like 4 or 5 things. And the cumulative effect of being really good at all those 4 or 5 things creates a competitive advantage, builds this flywheel because you've got this moat that you can defend that creates a competitive advantage. And AI is a great example of that. At the moment, for me, where I'm saying, you know, look, first mover advantage in our sector, it's typically, you know, a little bit sleepy. We've always leveraged technology and capability. Like, how do we lean ahead that? And how do we give ourselves a 30% plus competitive advantage versus everybody else? And then we root it deep into the culture and into the DNA of the organization. So there's this AI first thinking. I'm old enough to remember when people used to say people will never buy on a mobile phone. I'm also old enough to remember when people say people will never like use apps, so just delete them. You know, so I think of AI and a bit like that in our business, which is like actually, you know, it's that sort of a wave. You know, if you think AI first and you build some principles and you root it into the culture. So how I do it is we start with, in fact, I literally have one here. You know, we start with a model which is really clear about our purpose, where are we going, and that's evergreen. You know, that typically won't change. Then we have the vision that's time bound, that's really smart, measurable. And then we think about the pillars, like how are we going to do this? You know, so in our case, it's, you know, exceptional talent, it's, you know, curated supply, exceptional service, and AI, and then it's underpinned by our behaviors. Then that becomes our blueprint. Then that becomes like our way of running the business. It becomes our model. And then we use tools and techniques to then deal with execution. How do you execute that? Because that becomes then, if you don't have a route to execution, you're doomed. You know, it's the failure of, it's the first casualty of war is a plan. You can have the plan, but you need like a model. And we use different techniques. The current one we've used for the last couple of years is a model called 4DX, which is like the 4 disciplines of execution. It's a way of actually getting everybody in the organization aligned to your purpose and to your vision and to your pillars. And it's pretty cool because you can't really hide. It's got this discipline of sort of, you know, executing and transparency and holding people accountable, but also rewarding people as well.
Amazing, because that's got to be the biggest challenge with something like AI is actually changing the culture, I guess, of the organization to embrace it, because lots of different people have lots of different views around it.
They do, and I think, you know, I mean, AI is really interesting because, simply put, the more people are using it, and the more people we just keep forcing it on people, the more people are going, well, this is quite good. Actually, it can help me. So at the very beginning, you know, there was quite a lot of resistance, and the first protocol was, you just want AI to replace my jobs, to take away my jobs. You know, you're trying to sort of, you know, get rid of me by using AI. And then when people realize that wasn't really what we're trying to do, we're just trying to make you better. When we're trying to give you like a digital twin or a thought buddy and help you. And it's not just technology, because it can't be technology led. It needs to be everybody. I want everybody to have this idea of AI for all. Um, then, you know, you then have to do the sort of a stick piece, which is like, right, we're going to give everybody tooling and we're going to train everybody. And quite frankly, it's not optional, you know, and we'll track it and everybody has to be trained. So we have 4 modules effectively, and everybody has to do level 1 and 2. And then if you want to be like a wizard, you have to sort of go through, you know, level 3 and 4. I haven't got a category for someone like you, Chris, like ninja level type. But but gradually, what I've seen is adoption growing and growing and growing, and we track it because we can track it because people are logging in. And today, I've got 51% of the entire organization using and logging into at least one AI tool that's been approved on a weekly basis. And
Mhm.
48% of them are actually using the tools or putting prompts into the tool and engaging with the tool. And that's growing at about 25% month on month. So, like anything, like culture, like embedding it in and just keep talking about it and then rewarding people. Then, like, the special people have these things which are called AI guardians, like little
Mhm.
badges. And it's like McDonald's, you get stars, like the more advanced you are. So, that's the program that we're sort of gone through. The biggest single resistance area, I think, was technology to start with. Because, a lot of these people were quite, purists and were like, they'll never be able to write code as good as me. And I've got all these skills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think as more and more tools have been deployed and more capabilities come out and more realization, particularly around agentic coding and the way it's sort of working as well, and the ability for people to sort of, GitHub copilot a task and go and have a cup of coffee and come back and it's done it, people are now like, yeah, this is really good. And I can then use my own superpower, which is the really added value stuff. So, it's we've come a long way in a short space of time, but nowhere near where I want us to be ultimately.
Of course, but the technology will get better and the adoption will improve over time. I think what would be really interesting is getting more of an understanding of how you're using AI right now within the business. Like, what are your kind of best use cases, if you like?
It's very funny you say that because I'm actually off to London on Thursday to do a presentation on exactly that topic. And I was writing my notes for it yesterday, which I seem to have misplaced, so ignore me. Uh, so we have 100 tools that we're using in the organization. We have 52 of them that are fully approved. And what that means is like our data team, our legal team, and our technology team, sorry, cyber team, have gone through it and checked them all. The reason we have 100 is we have these people called guardians. We have like 35 of them, and they have like super user privileges, and they're like testing out some of the other tools. Some of the ones that are more like job specific. I guess if I look at use cases and where it's really adding value and can I put a number against it, like a financial number? I'll give you some simple examples. We have 500,000 photographs in a database of properties that we look after. So we look after 30,000 properties across the UK, 500,000 photographs in our database. What we've done recently is put every single one of those photographs through an AI model to identify exactly what is in those photographs and create tagging specifically for what's in those photographs, then to give us a quality score of each one of those photographs, then to demonstrate how they can enhance the quality of those photographs through retouching, then create automatically metadata for those photographs, and then to just pop them into a database so they can be accessed by our site. Now that took 7 days to do that, and 500,000 photographs. And we discovered things like, we had properties that had log burners that we weren't even talking about. Had, our metadata was appalling. And knowing the way that the LLMs are searching the metadata in particular at the moment, we wanted to be able to expose that metadata so that we become more visible in the LLM searches in particular. But also the images, there was a number of images that were maybe taken, say, 3 years ago, poorer cameras or whatever, we'll be able to like significantly enhance them without making them look fake. So that's one good example. Another good example then in photographs is, like it or not, everybody still buys from pictures and their reviews. So it's like pictures, reviews, price type thing. Our owners, who we love dearly, believe they're like David Bailey and they can take the best pictures and they're sending us photographs constantly. And our rejection rate was 53% of all images coming in from our owners. Now that really annoys the owners, because they're like, this is a great picture, you should be using it. But they just weren't good enough, they weren't shot in the right way, whatever. Our rejection rate, at the moment, we've managed to get down to 21% from that, because we're now able to sort of take that image and then parse it through an Adobe Firefly or a particular AI transitioning sort of a tool to enhance it. Again, that would have cost us a lot of money to go back to the owners, to send out a photographer to reshoot it, and all that stuff now can just happen automatically. The final one on images I'll give you is we've been doing a lot of static image to video using Runway ML or whatever, variety of sort of different tools as well. So we're now creating in our social media campaigns and a lot of our sort of outreach campaigns, the ability to bring the units and the property and the destination more alive using sort of AI sort of a tools as well. So that's just one example. Another example is we get 1 million contacts into this business a year, and we do record all the calls using Twilio. But what we didn't really have a lot of sentiment analysis. And actually, the agents, when they finish a call, were spending 10 to 15 minutes writing up all the details of the call, creating case files, case notes, whatever it may be. We now don't do any of that. Because we've just used Whisper and we've, ran it through 4.0 Mini and we've got a summary of it, and bang, it comes like straight away to all the agents. So, you can do the math in terms of how much. And that was quite a culturally interesting thing for us, because when we launched it, the agents were still spending 15 minutes going back in and just checking if it was right, because they didn't believe it was going to be good enough. So, that's another sort of a good example as well. We do, we have a big product team here and we do a lot of development, we do a lot of research. Pretty much everything we're doing now goes to rapid prototyping using a lot of vibe and sort of a coding, and we just time box it and say, right, you got 7 days, what can you do? And we're leveraging sort of the tools, and we're applying this like surge mentality to do things. So it's given us really quick and simple learnings, but it's allowing us to visualize things incredibly sort of quickly. So that's really helping in the whole product design, development, delivery pace as well. We training that we're delivering is all AI, driven by AI. What we did is we created an agent in using ChatGPT effectively, and we had a co-host, which was part of our learning and management team, chatting to the agent, which was a ChatGPT virtual agent, and having conversations about AI and how does it work. And then we then created a whole program and rolled that out. And again, it was using AI to demonstrate that sort of a capability. We have agents now that answer our telephone calls and out of hours and have conversations. So we use 11 Labs, use Make.com, a variety of different sort of automation sort of tools. The contact center closes at 8 o'clock. The calls are then picked up by I think we've got a couple of different names. Kim, I'll use as an example. Kim answers the call, has a proper conversation, triages all the information, workflows it all, scores it and ranks it, and then actually prioritizes it in the morning. So when the humans come in, the humans pick up the information and they get straight onto it. But it's pretty sophisticated how it works. You can book in particular times, particular time slots, diary management, and it's very conversational. It's not, it doesn't feel. I wasn't sure whether potential new owners and customers would engage with it, but I've been quite blown away by how receptive. The challenge we have is now everybody out of hours, if they have a problem, they try to use the agent to resolve a problem when the agent wasn't designed for that. So we've had to change quite a bit in terms of what the agent's for. We've created a number of agents as well. So, we have a big legal team here and we have lots of information. We've created a number of agents that basically scan all of our information, which is all a little bit disparate, which is obviously what AI is very good at, and bringing it all together, summarize it, and actually it's trained the model effectively to really understand how they answer the queries for the internal team if they have a question, a query. So it frees up my legal team to do the things that are slightly more sort of complicated. Actually, parallel to that, we've just hired our first AI agent, which is an actual agent from a third-party company, which is a legal agent from LexisNexis, to sort of handle some of the more complicated things as well. I could go on, Chris. I've got
No, I think it's been incredible to see.
We have got lots and lots and lots of sort of stuff going on, but stuff that actually genuinely is sort of adding value. There's some experimental stuff clearly, but there's a huge amount of stuff that I think is definitely making life easier. I think the biggest challenge and frustration we probably have at the moment is I have a cohort group that are very much driving it forward, and then I've got everybody else, and it's just trying to get everybody else up that curve. Now we're a Microsoft house, and we've made a decision that Copilot is our chosen LLM, and that's the one that people have access sort of to. But Copilot, my opinion, I'm sure, is not the best tool. I just have to have a leap of faith assumption that with the investment in OpenAI and where they're going, they'll sort of get there, because fair enough. And that's, so there's a huge amount of training going on and sort of showing people what they can sort of do. But I'm a bit frustrated because I know there's other tools out there that can do all these things sort of better, but you got to control the chaos. Otherwise, it's anarchy and everybody's doing everything else. I mean, I've got a friend of mine who works at Barclays, and Barclays are saying like it's just they've had to lock down everything because it's anarchy. Everybody's doing everything and putting personal data and all this sort of stuff into these
Mm.
sort of tools and not realizing what's sort of going on. So there's got to be some controls put in place.
So thinking about the future of work and how things are clearly going to change very dramatically, what should businesses be thinking about right now to make sure that they're ready to adapt to the future?
God, that's a big question. I think, businesses that are really clear on their purpose, their why, and really clear on their sort of a vision in terms of how they sort of get there. Then it's about working out the how and then saying, actually, how can tools and technology and how do we think things will evolve? How can it help us sort of get there? So, I don't believe we should be looking at technology and AI and looking for problems that don't exist necessarily today. You have to have enough people that are curious enough in your organization that can be the agitators. I mean, they're quite important sort of people. So hiring people to build muscle for the future, having some of those agitators, having people that, I mean, what I'm finding is I'm having to hire in a whole bunch of people who can be a little bit like, mini terrorists in my organization, sort of to push people. I mean, you've met Joe, my son, Chris, is an example. He's a great example who works for us, and he's like a little terrorist going in and sort of, pushing his elbows out. So building out that muscle and building sort of people, but really just being clear on your purpose. I sit on a number of different boards and I help a lot of organizations, and it always astounds me how many businesses that don't understand their why. What is it they're trying to do? The purpose effectively, and how do you galvanize people around it? And then it's like, well, how can tools, technology, people, process, how can that sort of help? So been really clear about building out that framework, and then saying, how do you get that competitive advantage? I mean, I always say to people, like, try and write your story, try and think about what that future looks like, and then work your way back from that as well. I mean, tools and technology, all this sort of stuff, they are tools to sort of help you. I think there is an arms race, and I think AI is not a fad. The exponential curve is enormous. It's only going in one direction. So, lean into it effectively and take advantage of it. But it's, it's just a tool to hopefully make your job easier and to make it easy for your people, be really clear about what your business actually is in terms of strong purpose. It's amazing, as I said, how many businesses don't know that or don't have that.
Mm, amazing. Thank you.